Hi, Paul Byrne from Razoyo. I wanted to go over the release of Grok3. There's been so much hullabaloo about this on X and other platforms, and just talking about this new model claiming to be better than DeepSeek, which it is. If you'll notice, there's a lot of bad press coming out about DeepSeek lately, exposing some of the problems and issues with it. It's really not very good at writing code. So I've kind of moved on from DeepSeek. Of course, these announcements come pretty quickly and often in the tech world. And so having another announcement about a new LLM model can seem a little, underwhelming, and probably, is it worth your time? Not worth your time. So hopefully this will help you out if you're a developer or if you're building a product. My main concern is with building digital products and what we should use LLMs for, if anything, in those products. And so testing their capabilities is kind of critical to my company, Razoyo. So I took a look at this one today because so many claims were made about it and how good it was. And really, for me, what it comes down to, is it good at writing code, and can I tie into it via an API and use its features? So let's take a look at this. So I'm gonna just discuss the first thing I had it do, and I'm working in Elixir. If you're a developer, Elixir's a well-known language. It's not one of the very most popular language, like Python, or it's not Rust, it's not Java. It's none of those languages. But it has a couple of really great advantages. And one for testing this kind of thing is you get an idea of how deep the model is. If the model can write decent code in Elixir, you know that it's got a pretty decent memory and it's been trained well on a wide variety of languages. The other is that Elixir comes with a really phenomenal web interface called Phoenix LiveView. And LiveView is a framework that is used to create sort of top-down views of code. In other words, a back-end developer can really kind of develop out the entire system without changing between, like, having React on the front end and having to tie into an API in the back end, etc. In Elixir with Phoenix LiveView, it all ties together seamlessly. But let's jump into this. The first thing I had it do was to write a script that grabs comments from YouTube videos, which seems like a relatively small thing to do, but you're connecting via an API over the internet. And I'm not going to show you the actual script that came down here. I will show you that this came out to be really quite favorable. Like it wrote the script really quickly. It explained it. One of the best things that I'm noticing about Grok is it's giving you not only the code to put in, but it's also, giving you sort of a breakdown of how to, set up the project, add your dependencies that you need, etc. It goes step by step. Now, OpenAI does this to an extent, not very well. And also, Claude does this pretty well, Claude Sonnet, but not as well as Grok. I do have to admit that I like the Claude Sonnet interface, which looks like this, a little bit better. This interface is actually, kind of divided up into where you have your application, and then you have the instructions on the other side. This is a very handy way of writing, writing code. So the first thing I had to do was just write a script that accesses the YouTube developer API endpoint and gives this, I give it a video ID code, and it's going to retrieve the comments on that code. And I'm not going to walk you through what Grok did. It did it flawlessly. It presented it quite well out of the boat. But something that it and Claude did was that they both chose a default video for me, and you can probably guess what that video might have been. Rich Ashley's Never Gonna Give You Up. So in this first round, I had it sending this, just outputting it to the terminal. And this is what Claude output with. I think Claude maybe gets a little bit the edge on the formatting for the script, for the output of the script. And they all did this with the exception of OpenAI. I had to give it a slight nudge, but I would put this in the win column for every one of them. Like they all did this passably well. And so I think that there's no reason to kind of go back to the script. They all handled the script well, which honestly is kind of what I expected, because even some of the previous models could write decent scripts, even in Elixir. But let's go back to the next phase of this. And after the script was written, I had it create a full Elixir Phoenix LiveView application. Now, this is what I was talking about before. This is that end-to-end, top-to-bottom, full stack development in a single language. ChatGPT, and so it runs me step by step very confidently of what to do, and I start running into errors. And with ChatGPT, when I ran into errors, it seemed to vary farther and farther away from the objective, to the point where I got to the end of this, and you can see that I had, I spent quite a bit of time with it. The wheels had just completely fallen off. And part of the problem is that it's not very precise. It says, oh, your code should look kind of like this or something like this. It's not being very precise. And by the time I got to this point, this far down in the process, ChatGPT, the wheels were off. It was clear, like there was no end game. It was start over time on ChatGPT. So it never actually came up with an answer that I could use. So this is a fail definitely for GPT-01. If I go look at Claude, now Claude was a little bit better in that it started writing out the application well. And I gotta be honest, like I really love this setup where I've got code over here on the right, and then on the left side, it's walking me through some things. A couple of things that Claude did that I thought were pretty good was it actually had me set up an environment variable, which for my YouTube API key. And that's critical from a security standpoint. Now, the reality was I was never going to actually use this in production, so that the security was not that much of a concern. But if somebody rehashed my code or something later on, I'd hate to be guilty of that kind of security snafu. In the end, though, I ended up kind of having the same problem with Claude that I ended up with OpenAI. It gave me code to just copy and paste in, which was fine. That's exactly what I was wanting. But then it kind of sends me on all these fetch quests looking to make sure that things that are naturally coded properly, like all this should be correct from that. So this file never would have touched it, and we never did touch it in our conversation. And that was part of the problem. ChatGPT to a greater extent, but Claude to a certain extent began to sort of forget what we had talked about. And so it's having me rehash things, and it's getting to the point where it's no longer really adding any value at all to the conversation. It's horrible, not only troubleshooting, but figuring out where to look to even troubleshoot and telling me where to look to troubleshoot. So I never got to Bright with either OpenAI, ChatGPT, or Claude. With Grok, I did get to Bright, and it wasn't a perfect, seamless path, to be honest. Like it didn't really get me there right away, but it got me really close. And I was able to feed back the error messages that the system was giving me. Even when I knew what was causing the error, I would feed that back in to see if give it a chance to correct it. Maybe it would correct it a different way than I did, but it did, and it would find ways to correct. So once I got into the application, it gave me in all the cut and paste, and then I'd report an error like this one, and I just really copied and pasted the trace in there, and it would do an analysis of the error, which Claude also did an analysis of the error. ChatGPT claimed it was doing an analysis of the error, but it did nothing. And then it would have me just like check some files and make sure everything was correct. Most of the errors, and I think this is probably true for all three of them, came from the fact that these languages evolve over time. And not only do I have different versions of the different languages that I could work with, but and we're just talking about Elixir here, but I had different versions of the plugins, what you would call plugins or extension or modules that I can use within, they're literally just like software libraries that plug into my code. And I can use those in my application. And so sometimes those things conflict. I need a certain version of this, of this particular module to be able to use with this version of Elixir. But then this other module that I want to use has a different version that's not available. And so, there's all this sort of cat and mouse trying to figure out, okay, where's my, how do I triangulate into the version of all three that work with each other? Fortunately, in Elixir, that's not that big of a deal. It's not that difficult to resolve, and you have options. But with Grok, I was always able to get like a reasonable response from it, one that made sense. It would tell me what to do. And when I felt like, I get to the bottom and I say, look, I'm having trouble like putting together all these different modifications, and it would give me a really good synopsis of what was to be done. But when I came back, after like 4 or 5 different rounds of troubleshooting and errors, I'm worried that maybe I made a cut and paste error or I've missed something, etc. And so I finally get it and I say, look, what should I be doing? Like, give me step-by-step instructions, including everything you've learned to this point to, get me to Bright. And so finally, it recognized my frustration, which I wasn't really frustrated. I was just trying to be clear. And it really goes into, from the very beginning, like which versions of which language, which things I should have installed, how to install them, and to make sure I have the proper languages installed. And I'm applying the proper version of the language of both Erlang, which is what Elixir is based on, Elixir itself. And when it got me down to this final version, between its own error troubleshooting and the compiler, it did get me to a working application. And it was the only LLM that got me there. Now, to be honest, this took me over 2 hours to do, and I could have written this application on my own without any, help, just maybe a browser and a search engine to help me along the way. I probably could have got there. I'm not the fastest Elixir programmer, but I probably could have gotten there within about an hour. But here's what it looks like, and this is really pretty amazing. And the way that it outputs, this is I didn't do any styling on this. It took care of all of the styling. Let me pick up another video on YouTube, and we'll just go to, Led Zeppelin's Robert Plant. Pick up the code here. So here's the video code. And this is what I had asked it to do. I said, hey, take a code. And then when I hit comments, now look how fast those comments load. The actual output of this is quite good. It's very easy to read. And it picked up on all that on its own. Conversely, this is what OpenAI thought was, a reasonable presentation. Now, I didn't give any instructions on, hey, make this a good presentation, make this readable, etc. But it did kind of, just output the raw JSON. Is it absolutely game-changing, amazing that with a relatively, a prompt that I could give a junior developer, give them a day to work on and bring it back and expect something to be working and to be, formatted properly and test written, all that sort of stuff? None of them did that off the bat. But with Grok3, I was able to have an interactive session. It continued to follow along, even though we'd been sort of going back and forth for quite some time. It was able to continue to follow along, continue to see what I was working on without forgetting, steps it had done along the way. And we were able to kind of, recast and restart at points that made sense. It did a great job of really sort of keeping the conversation flowing, and it felt like someone who was helping me out. So is Grok3 a game changer? Is it AGI? I mean, what the hell is AGI? I've got some videos on that as well. You can check those out. But no, it's none of that. But it is better at writing code than any of the other models that I've ever tried. And honestly, like by quite a bit. It's the first one that I can get past sort of the script writing stage, even though, it didn't do it perfectly off the bat. So hope that was helpful for you. Appreciate you watching this video, and I'll look forward to seeing you soon.